If Kansas State wants to play in Manhattan in March, they got to make some noise in the Big 12 tournament.
You are Locked On Kansas State, your daily podcast on the Kansas State Wildcats, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, welcome on into Locked On Kansas State, your daily Kansas State Wildcats podcast. Thank you so much for making Locked On Kansas State your first listen or second listen if you're listening to this as a bonus episode every single day. Welcome back to my everydayers. Thank you so much and welcome into this afternoon edition of Locked On Kansas State. We're going to dig into the women's basketball side on this one. Thanks for joining me after my rant this morning on the men's side. If you haven't checked that out, check that one out. It's an absolute doozy. But we're looking into the women's basketball team on this one. We're going to talk Ayoka Lee being sidelined for a couple weeks now and going to miss the Big 12 tournament. What's that mean moving forward? And then a couple other interesting and fun bits to end this episode. Before we get into it, though, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. So check out FanDuel.com for more. Ayoka Lee being sidelined for 2 weeks with a foot injury, having a minor procedure after only playing 5 minutes in senior night against the Jayhawks just a few days ago. Thought we were past this, thought we were out without Ayoka Lee for quite some time. She comes back a little earlier than expected, and it seems like that it wasn't the best way to go. Now, obviously, they were not anticipating this. They were hoping that they could get through this and get by it, but that just wasn't the case. In the post game after the Kansas game, Coach Jeff Mittie came out and said that she was feeling a lot more sore than anticipated, and it turned into the fact that she's going to get a procedure. Now, although this is going to make us very anxious for the foreseeable future as we prepare for the NCAA tournament, it's something that is going to have to get done and something we're just going to have to wait around and hope that this team can step up if they want to continue to host for the second year in a row in Manhattan for the first couple rounds of the tournament. Ayoka Lee came out with a quote after the conversation about her having procedures saying, "I made the decision now in order to give myself 7 to 10 days of practice and preparation for the NCAA tournament." She leads the team in scoring, 15.5 points per game. That's something that Kansas State has struggled with since losing her. And obviously the rebounding has been an issue as well. It's been a revolving door trying to fill Ayoka Lee's shoes since she has been sidelined with injury. Now, this team has found and shown at some time that they can be a good team without Ayoka Lee. We saw how they performed against TCU early in the injury just a few weeks ago. It was a very good matchup between, I believe, 9 and 10 ranked teams in the country at the time, and Kansas State took care of TCU. But down the most recent stretch, it hasn't been the same way, the same feel for Kansas State. It's almost like teams are starting to figure out how to take care of the Wildcats without Ayoka Lee. We saw some pretty tough losses all against ranked opponents over this past time with the injuries while waiting for the injury of Ayoka Lee. Ranked 25 Oklahoma State at the time, they lost by 30 points, 85-55. It was an absolute blowout. It was probably the worst loss out of all of them. They also lost in a pretty rough matchup to West Virginia. Both of them were pretty humbling losses. They lost 70-57 in that one. Excuse me. And then most recently, they lost to Baylor in Manhattan, the first time losing in Manhattan all season, 79-62. None of them were really close. And those were the toughest matchups, with the exception of that TCU matchup. They won by 9, 59-50. So out of the 4 games for these ranked opponents that they played without Ayoka Lee, they only went 1-3. That's not going to cut it heading into Kansas City for the Big 12 tournament if they want to continue to be one of the top 16 seeds, which we'll get into later on the show where they sit right now. But as we look forward moving into the Big 12 tournament, they have to make some noise and potentially winning if they want to continue to hold on to one of those top seeds. The plus side is after they play Iowa State this weekend, which we'll get into a little bit of a preview later on in this episode. If they get the win, they're going to have the double bye, guaranteed to have the double bye in the Big 12 tournament, meaning they're not going to have to play until Friday, March 7th, when the other teams ahead of them will have to play 2 rounds before that. The tournament begins on Wednesday. They won't have to play until Friday. If they win out, they'll play either on Sunday or Monday, depending if BYU is in that situation. There's a little asterisk on Big12.com talking about the tournament lineup, and it says the championship game is scheduled for Sunday, March 9th, but it says should BYU advance to the championship, the game will be played on Monday, March 10th. I'm not sure why that's the case. I don't know if that's a religious thing. I'm not really sure, but the game will not be on Sunday. The game will be on Monday if BYU is in the championship game, and hopefully that's against Kansas State. They're going to have to perform better than what we saw, how they played against Baylor, how they played against West Virginia, and how they played against some of these other teams that they lost to, Oklahoma State, as I mentioned, because some of those teams are going to be those top ones, those top teams in the sitting right with them with those double byes. TCU is probably going to be the team that wins it all, be the number 1 seed heading into the Big 12 tournament. They're going to be the favorites. Baylor probably the number 2. And then depending on what happens at the end of the weekend, Kansas State will most likely either be the 3 or the 4 seed. I think there is a small chance that they can be popped out down to the 5 and only get 1 bye. So this win against Iowa State is actually an important one. And you want to make sure you get on the right path while you get ready for the Big 12 tournament that begins hopefully for Kansas State on Friday with the double bye. But as of right now, the predicted top 4 seeds, TCU, Baylor, Kansas State, and Oklahoma State. Out of those 4 we just mentioned, those are all the teams that they've played without Ayoka Lee, and they're 1-4 in that, with the only win against TCU. They lost against Baylor recently. They lost against Oklahoma State recently. None of those 2 games were close. 1-2, I should say, not 1-3. So things are going to have to change. It all starts on Sunday against Iowa State to make sure that they can be ready and be prepared for a world that they now know will be without Ayoka Lee until the tournament. Maybe that is one of the reasons why they didn't perform well against Baylor in the recent game. There was the anticipation of maybe Ayoka Lee playing, and then she did not. That was not a thing, and no longer was. We kind of saw it with the men's side as well, with the Arizona State game just recently, where Coleman Hawkins was ruled out just an hour before tip-off, and they had no game plan. At least it looked like that. And Coach Tang actually said that in the press conference, that he did a bad job coaching, get them to a game plan. I'm not sure if that was the same with Coach Mittie in the Baylor game, but they definitely struggled, and they had a hard time doing a lot of things that would have been great. And honestly, if Ayoka Lee was there, they probably would have won that game. So something to keep in mind with that one. There are a lot of very good teams in the Big 12. We've already mentioned a lot of them, and we probably will see them right away on Friday. If you are playing a team after your double bye, that means you are playing a hot team on Friday. That means they've won at least the last 2 games. They had to play 2 games to get there. With maybe one if you got the single bye, whatever the case may be. But you're going at a team that already has a tournament win. They had the win to get to you, meaning that they've had some stuff figured out. So that's something that Kansas State's going to have to keep in mind as they prepare for the game on Friday. But we have to get to the game first this weekend to finish out the regular season on the road in Ames against Iowa State. We'll get to that and a couple other interesting tidbits that have came in lately, with potentially Jeff Mittie leaving Kansas State. Is that a thing? Is that something we should actually look into? We'll talk about that next, right here on Locked On Kansas State. Life moves at you fast. When you have a family, one day you're watching your kids take their first step, and before you know it, they're off to college. That's why securing their future is so important.
Fabric by Gerber Life makes it simple to get term life insurance that fits your family needs. With Fabric, you can apply for term life insurance online, right from your couch. You could be covered in under 10 minutes, and in many cases, no health exam is required. You can get $1 million in coverage for less than $1 a day. So protecting your loved ones doesn't have to break the bank. They also offer free digital wills, access to investment accounts to help you plan for your children's future. So join the thousands of parents who trust Fabric to protect their family. Apply today in just minutes at meetfabric.com/lockedoncollege. That's meetfabric.com/lockedoncollege. Policies issued by Western Southern Life Insurance Company, not available in certain states. Price is subject to underwriting and health questions.
And welcome on back, and thank you for making Locked On Kansas State your first listen today. For your second listen, check out Locked On College Basketball with Isaac Shiade and Andy Patton. Don't wait for March. Be the most informed college basketball fan now. Find Locked On College Basketball on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. So check that out for your second listen of the day. We're talking women's basketball on this bonus episode of Locked On Kansas State for getting you into the weekend. They're going to take on Iowa State on Sunday and then prepare for the Big 12 tournament without Ayoka Lee. It's going to be a very big deal to see if they can rise above the injury concerns of missing with their best player, the team that leads in points and rebounds, even with all the injuries that have happened to her this season. Now, Ayoka Lee is one of the best players in the Big 12 when healthy and is a huge difference maker. This is a team that with Serena Sundell and Ayoka Lee and the rest of the Kansas State squad, that if they are firing in all cylinders, I don't think there's a single team in the country. Yeah, I'm looking at you, Notre Dame, Texas, UCLA, you name it. I don't think there's a team that can beat them if they have everybody ready to go and 100%. Will that be the case? Even after Ayoka Lee returns will be the biggest question. But a different question that has popped up on the feeds as of lately is an interesting potential move of head coach Jeff Mittie. And obviously, let's take this with a grain of salt, but On3 came out with something earlier on Thursday after Robin Pinkston of Missouri decided that she would be stepping down at the end of the season. She will no longer be the head coach of the Tigers after being there for 15 years with the program. And On3 put out some top candidates to watch to replace. And right away, it got my eyes looking because in the thumbnail, Jeff Mittie is standing there with a little finger pointed up and smiling. And I was like, why is Jeff Mittie on this conversation? Why is he even being talked about? Well, Jeff Mittie, according to the report, we all know he's been with Kansas State for quite some time now. He's been with the Wildcats since 2014 and taking the team to 5 NCAA tournaments in his 11 years with the Wildcats. But there is some conversations because he hails from Blue Springs, Missouri, and graduated from Missouri Western back in 1989. Both of those very close to being the Missouri Tigers. And also the Tigers' new athletic director was with Kansas State at some point during Mittie's tenure. So there's this thought process between what On3 is saying for potential candidates with the connections with the athletic director of Missouri, with Jeff Mittie, thinking there could be a potential that at least a phone call is made, seeing if they would be interested in moving to the SEC. And you might think that this is something that there's no way that Jeff Mittie would want to move on. What he's done with this squad so far, bringing them to a deep NCAA run last season, putting them to having some great players in the program. Recruiting's been very good right now, but having the potential to go back to your home area, if that's something where you still call home. Now, for the record, he's been here since 2014, so his mind shift could be differently. I've lived in a lot of different places in my life, being in the military, moving back and forth. I know how that feels, finding a new home, if you will, after being there for about a decade. So what does that mean for Jeff Mittie? Well, personally, I think it's all smoke, but there probably will be a phone call at least to kind of see if he's interested in moving on. I think that he might be one of the top candidates. Why wouldn't you go ahead and try and get a guy like Jeff Mittie in your program? to run your program because he has his proven success with Kansas State. Right now, you should take that as a nod of as respect because your coach in your program for Kansas State is going to be sought after. We saw this with Jerome Tang with another SEC school just a few years ago with Arkansas. Maybe this could be a leverage for Jeff Mittie as well, maybe to get an extension. He is 58 years old, so it really depends on how long he wants to keep coaching. But to me, I think it's just all smoke. I don't think this is anything you really have to worry about until it happens, because these things happen so fast anyways. Although this just popped up, and it's something we talk about because we saw it on one of the top college websites in the nation with On3, I don't think it's anything to worry about. And I think the main focus is the Big 12 tournament and the NCAA tournament, because this team has what it takes, especially if Ayoka Lee is back and healthy, to make a deep run in the NCAA tournament. There are also some other coaches, that have popped up on this that would make really good candidates as well. She mentioned Molly Miller from Grand Canyon. She mentioned Aaron Russell from Richmond, Kristen Gillespie from Illinois State, JC Hoyt from Oklahoma State, another Big 12 team, and just a couple others as well, including Kelly Harper from Tennessee. So they might not even leave the conference. This might not even be a type of coaching position that Jeff Mittie doesn't go after. But the fact that his name has already been mentioned, and the announcement of her saying she was going to step down was only hours before. This is a knee-jerk reaction for sure. But one, this was very good research, already knowing that he's from this area. And it really makes you think that it could happen. So just something to keep in mind. But again, I don't think you should be worried too much. As of right now, I'm calling it smoke. And let's focus on the Big 12 tourney in the NCAA tournament coming up for the team that matters, the women's team, who should make a deep run in this tournament, maybe find the first national championship in Kansas State history. We got some fun stuff else to talk about with this show, and then we'll finish up with some Iowa State talk as we get into the weekend here. Let's close up the weekend with a mock WNBA draft that not only has one Kansas State player, two, and actually both of them going in the first round. Let's do that right here on Locked On Kansas State.
March basketball is here, and there's no better way to get in action than with Prize Picks, the best place for daily fantasy sports. With Prize Picks, you pick more or less on at least two players' projections, and if you're right, you can win money, baby. You can win 1,000 times your cash. It's fast, it's easy, and it keeps every game exciting. I love how you can make my picks in less than 60 seconds and stay engaged all game long. And on Tuesdays, they got promos. Talk about Taco Tuesday. Yeah, they got promos like that where you get discounted player projections for even more value. So download the app today and use code LOCKEDONCollege, all one word, for $50 off instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's Locked On College, all one word, for $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks. Run your game.
And welcome back to Locked On Kansas State. Hey, do me a favor if you haven't already, click that subscribe button below and join the adventure. Join Locked On Kansas State as we continue to give you Wildcats coverage every single day. No one does it every single day like we do right here on Locked On Kansas State. So click that subscribe button if you want to be the most informed Kansas State Wildcats fan on the internet. So go ahead and do that right now. We're talking Kansas State women's basketball as we get closer to the weekend. They play on Sunday against the Iowa State Cyclones in Ames. It's going to be an exciting game because it's the final game of the regular season. And they got to make a statement win. They have to find a way to bounce back from the Baylor loss that just happened a few days ago. And they kind of have to re-find their identity without Ayoka Lee. Because right now, if we're comparing to what we saw in that Baylor game, they really don't have an identity. And that's something that they struggled with, and they got to bounce back on Sunday. Thankfully, Iowa State's not the greatest team this season. I mean, in the eyes of record-wise, but they're not terrible. They're not terrible by any means. They have a winning record. They're 20-10. They're 11-6 in conference. They're 4-1 in their last 5. This is by no means going to be a walk in the park for Kansas State, especially after what they've just shown against that ranked Baylor team in Manhattan. This is a rivalry. Kansas State versus Iowa State. It's going to be a tough matchup. It's the final game of the regular season. Iowa State has a lot to play for. They're trying to better their seed in the Big 12 tournament. They're trying to make sure that they can get into the NCAA tournament with a winning record in the Big 12 at 11-6. It looks a lot better for them if they're 12-6 instead of 11-7. They're not going to just slouch over at the Hilton Coliseum for Kansas State, who's trying to find their identity. This is going to be a tough game. And I think it was going to be a lot tougher of a game. It feels like a lot tougher of a game than what it should be because of the fact that Ayoka Lee is not going to be there, because of the fact that they're looking for their identity. Whatever the case may be, this game is something that you have to pay attention to and keep an eye on. This game is tipped off at 3 o'clock on Sunday. It's the same exact time as the men's game, which I can't stand, by the way, but you're going to have 2 screens to watch both of these. Or if you got to pick one, watch the women's one, because this one has a lot more ties to focus on compared to the men's, at least in my opinion. This one's on ESPN2, Disney Plus, ESPN Plus. You can check it out. There's a reason why this one's important, because it makes sure that they stay a top 4 seed in the Big 12 tournament, meaning a double bye. It also keeps them on the hook for being one of the top 16 teams that was just revealed right now on Thursday, the newest one, according to March Madness. You can find it on social media. March Madness WBB showed the top 16 on Thursday. And right now, Kansas State is in there. They are ranked 15th in the country, so that's, give you a good idea where they sit. But as of right now, they are the 4 seed in the Spokane Regional 1, meaning that they will host in Manhattan, if everything stays as is, the first couple games. When they get to the Sweet 16, they'll travel to Spokane, Washington, and be the 4 seed in the tournament. Now, the other 3 teams in that bracket, UCLA, tough team, LSU, very tough team, and North Carolina in the 1, 2, and 3 seeds respectively. So that's a tough bracket to be in. Now, for the record, I think all 16 teams are very tough this year when you're looking at all of them. I think this might be one of the toughest women's basketball brackets that we've ever seen. It might compare to last year's. It might even be tougher than last year's because there's not that higher echelon of teams. When you look at the South Carolinas, the UConns, the Iowas of Caitlin Clark, and the South Carolina teams that didn't lose for quite some time, or LSU with Angel Reese. You don't really have that this year. The number 1 team has bounced back and forth so many times just in the last few weeks. I don't think we've had the same number 1 team in women's basketball 2 weeks in a row for quite some time. Meaning the parity's there, which is great for the sport, but it also means that there's no clear favorite to who can win this all. So if Serena Sundell and Ayoka Lee are healthy and ready to go, and the rest of the team can step up and do what they need to do to make sure that this team wins, they have a really good shot at making that happen. Speaking of Ayoka Lee and Serena Sundell, something interesting popped up on my feed as I was preparing for this show. Windsor, it's an Instagram page called, I think it's called Windsor, WINSIDR. I want to make sure I give them the best credit there. Dropped their 2025 WNBA mock draft 2.0. Now, there's already some differences here because the Washington Mystics made an extra trade and they now have an extra pick, and this isn't involved here, so it could change a little bit. But I still thought this was interesting and worth mentioning because out of the 12 picks in the first round, Kansas State is sitting with 2 of them. Serena Sundell is projected in this mock draft to go 7th overall in the WNBA draft to the New York Liberty. And I think that would be a really fun place for her to sit, along with Sabrina Ionescu, another really fantastic guard in the WNBA. I think she's one of the brightest stars in the WNBA. But Serena Sundell and Sabrina Ionescu would be really fun to watch. Serena Sundell is arguably one of the best facilitators and best playmakers in the nation right now. And Ionescu is a very good point guard as well, but she's also a very good shot creator and scorer. You put those 2 together, I mean, just having the idea, the presence and the thought of putting those 2 together in New York could be really fun. And New York has that opportunity to, again, continue to move forward with that whole super team that they built last season. Ayoka Lee is also on this list, and she's right at the bottom of the first round, but still found a way to make it. And that's number 12. Going to the Dallas Wings with the final pick of the first round. Now, I guess, to put it into context, I've heard these rumors. These are not confirmed, by the way, but might as well go ahead and just speak them. That Ayoka Lee might not be interested in entering the WNBA draft, that she wants to fulfill a career in the medical field, and she might not be interested in taking that step into professional basketball. So if that's the case, then this doesn't mean anything. It's null and void. But regardless of it, getting the respect and getting the acknowledgement of 2 Kansas State players being looked at as a potential first-round players is really cool. Not a single other school is getting that type of love right now. Number 1 overall right now is Olivia Miles, according to the mock draft, also going to the Dallas Wings. They have 2 first-round picks, the 1st and the 12th. So Olivia Miles would team up with Ayoka Lee in Dallas, according to this mock draft. And then Seattle would get Paige Beckers at number 2 overall, the guard out of UConn. And that is your 1-2 in this mock draft. But again, Serena Sundell going 7th in the mock to New York Liberty, Ayoka Lee going 12th overall to the Dallas Wings. That's really cool. You know, even if you don't like mock drafts, you know, if you're not into one of those things, we talked about it in the NFL Combine episode just the other day. I love the NFL draft, and it's no different with any other drafts. I think they're just so cool. I like the aspect behind them. I like the trades. I like the strategy. So I thought that was a really neat thing that popped up my feed today and wanted to share with all of you. Okay, with that being said, this Sunday, Kansas State, Iowa State, it's a lot bigger game than you thought it was going to be a few weeks ago. Don't you think? After these losses with the ranked wins, make sure you're cheering them on. If you're there, that's great. But if not, check them out on, cheer on social media, cheer them out by watching the game. And you can come back here as we talk more and recap the game early next week. But until then, please like the video, please subscribe, and we'll see you here next time, right here on Locked On Kansas State.